welcome to the latest episode of the Modern Brewer Podcast with me, your host, Chris Lewington. We're back. We ended 2024 with my top 5 takeaways from the first full year of the Modern Brewer Podcast. And we started with my predictions for 2025. And now we're going to continue with a more classic Modern Brewer Podcast episode style. And this week's episode is going to be an absolute banger. For those of you who managed to catch the 3-part article series in the Brewers Journal last year entitled The Future of Craft Beer, will understand the pedigree of today's guest. If you didn't manage to, don't despair, as we are going to go into even more detail on today's episode. Today's guest is, of course, Luca Lorenzoni, ex-MD of Camden Town Brewery and former CEO of Northern Monk during their epic growth phase. Luca now spends his time with the consultancy Path, helping the industry's most impressive breweries grow in today's changing market. And that is exactly what we will be talking about today. Since joining the industry 11 years ago, I have never heard such misery surrounding what still to me is a richly rewarding and fun industry. There is of course good reason for this, but what me and Luca are going to be discussing is it really that bad? Whilst today we're not focusing on a specific production topic, understanding the market we operate in, how to navigate and excel in it is absolutely essential for any modern brewer. Before we get into today's episode though, a word from the very people who help this show continue to grow. I've only ever heard good things about Clean Earth Energy, so I'm excited to welcome them as sponsors of this episode. They've been in the renewable energy game for over a decade, working with breweries like Verdant Brewing, Ludlow Brewing, and friends of the podcast, Wiper and True. I've actually worked with Clean Earth Energy personally. Ed and their team are second to none, with such detailed support all the way through to installation, commissioning, and beyond. They design solar energy systems that suit your exact business needs, saving breweries thousands of pounds a year on energy costs and cutting carbon emissions way down. I've seen them work with so many breweries up and down the UK, and they're doing great stuff for the industry. So please check them out here at cleanearthenergy.com. And before we get into the episode, for my UK listeners, a short message. BeerX is coming up quick, the 19th and 20th of March. And I have some exciting news. I'll be co-hosting an after party at Love Lane Brewery with friends of the podcast, Pneumatech and Murphy & Sons. There'll of course be beer, food, and some great chats about sustainability. We're fairly limited on space, and because I would hand out probably 500 tickets, Murphys are rightfully in control of them. If you want to come down and chat sustainability, taste some beers that have been made with generated nitrogen from Pneumatech, and probably have even more free merch shoved in your face, email your Murphy's rep and ask for some tickets. Okay, listeners, let's do this. Oh, welcome to the show, Luca Lorenzoni.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Hey, man. Yeah, look, I really appreciate you coming on, Luca. I know you've got a busy schedule now with the different sort of work-life balance that you had before, but it's really appreciate you coming on the show and giving the listeners sort of the insight into the craft beer industry from a big strategic level, because it's something I'm really interested in, and I really can't wait to hear everything.
Absolutely. Well, no, thanks for having me again. I think as you know, we've chatted many times over the last year, and I love what you do. And it's been good to get you involved with some of the businesses I work with as well. So yeah, man, it's only natural that we do this next step, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's like I've been writing a list of the people I want to have on the show this year. And like when I had your name, I was like, oh, wait, I know Lucas so well. I'll just message him. This shouldn't be a challenge at all. And it was really appreciate finding the time. And it's really cool we get to talk about a subject that I think we both feel quite passionately about, talking about, you know, not just the industry, but maybe that this doom and gloom that surrounds it right now, and why that might not necessarily be the right attitude to have towards it. But before we dive too deep into that, could you, for the people who might not know who you are, Luca, you just give a bit of background about, you know, who you are and kind of what drew you into the craft beer industry in the first place?
Sure. I'll try and keep this quite short, because I feel like recently did the podcast with like Track as well, and it was quite a lot of focus on who I am. So, but you know, at the end of the day, most recently was the CEO of Northern Monk. Previous to that, Camden Town Brewery, and previous to that, about 10 years within AB InBev, so the bad guys, the biggest brewery in the world, if you will. So I think I've been in beer for 15, 16 years, that kind of thing, even more now actually. But the impetus for craft beer was I was always interested, obviously, in beer overall. Back 16 years ago, whatever it was, when I was in Canada, getting into it, into beer, there was actually, where I lived in Canada, very little craft beer. So, but I was already quite interested, and I actually wrote a business plan for opening a brewery in 2008 in Canada, which never happened. But after many years working for the big guys and learning a lot, but also not feeling fully like it represented the values and what I wanted to focus on within my work career, I angled my way. I actually left InBev, and then a couple of months after leaving, got connected into Jasper, who founded Camden Town Brewery, who was at that time had just been purchased by InBev. So I kind of half went back into there, but obviously starting to make my way more into the craft beer side of things. It's quite autonomous from the big business, at least for the start. And then, further after that into Northern Monk, which when I started, Northern Monk was about 12,000 hectoliters. So still, not small, but a lot smaller than it is today. That's for sure. And so, so big fan of craft beer. And now what I do is I work with businesses, predominantly, I call them challenger brands, but, people that are challenging the incumbents or the category as it is today. So most craft breweries would fit in that space. I now work with likes of Vault City, Caravan Coffee is another one. There's a few other breweries that I just started working with. For the sake of having not agreed with them, whether I'd say if I'm working with them or not, I won't say their names. But yeah, that kind of thing. Pollen Projects, which was started by Ben Branson, who founded Seedlit, a non-alcohol kind of incubator. I worked with them last year. We Are Beer Festival, so all that kind of stuff. Generally, my motto is work with good people, doing good things, have fun with what you're doing, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you feel like the craft beer market is super unique? Because you say you work with maybe the coffee industry and maybe non-alc, but I guess that's pretty similar. But do you find that it's really unique craft beer industry? Because I feel like the people who are in it, like me, I always think that it is so unique, but is it really that unique?
Not really. I think it's a good question. I think, the one thing is the reason I say not really is because what it really is you're talking about, I always start with the consumer. So if you start with the consumer, what you're talking about is you're talking about a craft consumer. Forget beer for a second. A craft consumer, someone who's willing to pay more for something because there's some element of that product that is elevated, right? So whether that's quality, whether that's brand aesthetics, they collaborate with artists, so whatever it might be, right? But that's craft is obviously a very loose term, but that's kind of how I would bucket it. So someone who's willing to pay more for something because it gives them more than the standard option, right? So in that way, that consumer exists in many categories, and in fact, the craft beer consumer is oftentimes the craft coffee consumer. And last year, to show how much so, when Greg at We Are Beer, when they did that consumer report in 2000, last year's one, I was working with Caravan. We used it for coffee. It said look, this is literally, and of course, some tweaks and stuff. Demographics are slightly different, but that craft consumer exists. So I think the short answer is no, it exists in nowadays in almost every category. And that's where all these smaller, newer brands are popping up because they're delivering that. But I do think craft beer was one of the first categories to really boom in that way. So I think if you would have asked that question, if you think craft beer in the UK is 25 years old this year, right? Depending on how you define it. So I'm defining meantime, 1999. If you would have asked that question 10, 15 years ago, the answer would have been yes. If you ask it now, it's probably no, but it's one of the first to really kind of crack into that.
Yeah, really interesting. I saw recently that only 2005, there was only 500 breweries in the UK, to give an idea of just how much it's grown.
Yeah.
And it is crazy, right? But, maybe where we are, I feel like maybe we're slightly unique at the moment is the brewing industry has such a strong narrative around like this doom and gloom, what's going on right now, the state of the industry. I read all of these headlines everywhere. Like, why do you think that is happening in the brewing industry right now?
Ooh, that's a good question. Why is it happening? I haven't really thought of it from that angle. I more so think of it in the angle of like, that's a load of shit. Let's move on. But why is it happening is a good question. I think like, again, maybe there's an element of because it was one of the earlier crafts, everything's in a life cycle, right? So it's going to happen to non-alcohol. It's going to happen to whatever, you name it. It's going to happen to everyone. But maybe being one of the first ones, it's like, okay, well, this craft thing boomed, and all of a sudden, no, it's not as big as everyone thought it was going to be. It's probably an element of that. I think, there's always the everyone likes to kind of the contrasts and things. So, everything was like so rosy and stuff. And the second it's not, it's like, well, that's news. Let's talk about it because it's it's the opposite of what people were saying for so long. So that's going to create friction and contrast, and that's what gets people's attention. So there's probably a little bit of that. But yeah, I'm not really sure, but I'm sure it's a combination of I guess the other thing too, and I mean, this is a lot of it comes down to, and this is, one of the things I focused on even a couple of years ago when I wrote those articles on the future of craft beer, but like the way it's really easy to talk about something in a negative way when you compare it to what it used to be, right? Because if the future was perfect, or sorry, if the past was perfect, the future is not going to be perfect. Oof, right? That you're not perfect anymore, right? If you are someone who runs 100 meters in 30 seconds and you do it in 25, great, keep going. If you're someone who's did it in 10 and you're doing it in 25, then so it's all like perspective, which is what I mean. We'll come on to I think some other examples of that, but yeah, I think that's a major element of it too.
Yeah, I agree. It's that where your benchmark is set, isn't it? And 2016, 2017, it was the heyday of a very growth intensive market.
Yeah,
And it's just not that growth intensive anymore. So yeah,
you
yeah,
got it.
I see that. I see that very similarly. So how do you see the current state of the brewing industry?
How do I see it? I mean, like normal, right? Like I think the past wasn't. I guess the word normal is a bit weird, but the past was um, was not sustainable, right? I think that's maybe the better way to say it as opposed to normal. But like, there were some people that took a risk quite early on, built a category that obviously there was something there that was, people wanted, and people and some founders and brewers and marketing people, all the likes, like, really, really crack that code at some point and made it happen. But like that idea that there's a lot of openings, virtually no closings, everything's rosy, lots of profitability, cash coming in from every which angle, breweries being bought. Like that's not sustainable, right? That's a
Mm,
phase of life. It's a slice of life. Like, and so I think, where we are now is a different part of that life cycle, which is where most categories are. It's like you got to crack on with how things are. And I guess, one of the things that I would come on to, but like, where things are is good, right? It's just not what it was.
yeah.
um, so yeah, so I think that's like a bit, frame of reference is so important to everything. And I think, if you zoom out on things, it's not bad. It's just, this is the reality of what it is today. And I think one of the very, like, I guess, practical ways to kind of, to bring that to life is like, if you talk to breweries that opened in 2020 or after, you often get a very different perspective than if you talk to breweries that opened before 2020, just because they saw things differently, right? Like,
Mm,
and they built their businesses slightly differently because that's the way things were going. And now for those businesses, the ones that, that aren't really strong at some key things, they're struggling because of that. For the ones that are younger, they built their business in this new reality. So it's not bad. It's just a new reality that a lot of people are thriving in, quite frankly.
yeah. Do you feel that maybe those breweries who went through the previous, I mean, everyone still references COVID pretty extensively in every bit of news I've read that has negative, still the word of COVID is used. Do you feel that that is that big of a hangover is still happening to a lot of places who took on a lot of debt, for example, or
I think Yeah, with COVID, I think the debt was the issue. A lot of people took on debt that was really cheap at the time. It doesn't, that obviously, but it's debt, it has to be paid at some point. I think there's that. I think, like if you take, from my example, we at Northern Monk, for instance, we agreed with Tesco in September 2019 to launch into Tesco, which went live in April 2020. Which was literally 2 weeks after the country shut down. The volumes we were doing through Tesco at the time was like 3 times what was the plan, the agreed plan with them. So I mean, like everything went. We were before COVID hit. We were like literally a week away from signing the lease on a brew pub in Shoreditch, and everything changed on the spot. It was like, let's take that money. That money has to go into the brewery because we need more capacity to we can't let our our customers down. And so like, the business plan changed. So I think COVID, yeah, there's an impact, but honestly, I think the war in Ukraine was just as much, if not even more, of an sustained impact for what we're feeling today than COVID was. Just because when it comes to like the cost of things, the cost of living, inflation, all that kind of stuff that happened on the back of that, that's probably the things that I think hurt the industry quite a lot, and including cash into the capital for trying to get capital from places like once inflation went up and all those kinds of things, like labor costs are going up, which is really really difficult for an industry that doesn't have huge margins. So I think that's probably the bigger sustained impact. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to separate those two things because they kind of one led into another.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a bit of a back to back, wasn't it, for a lot of places, which I mean, I can understand why breweries would struggle with that, especially if you were to take on debt expecting the market to resume where it was, and then it hasn't, and then then the cost of energy, etc. Although yeah, we'll probably get into it. I do believe the cost of energy is obviously a problem, but directly you can also just reduce what you consume, but we can get into that a little bit later on. So talking about maybe more of the optimistic side, like do you have any data or trends that challenge the sort of narrative of a declining craft beer industry?
But I think, like, as I said, I think it's frame of reference is so important. So, I mean, with that kind of thing, I would just keep it simple and like really start at the beginning, right? Like that for me, the on-trade market for beer and cider, so total beer and cider, just on-trade is 13.5 billion, right? You combine the off-trade, I mean, depending on sources, because again, data is to a degree up for interpretation, is, call it 25 to 30 billion dollars in the UK. Right. That's friggin' huge. Right. So at the end of the day, when you're in a business or start a business, whatever it is, the first thing is your first risk. The first thing is you want to build something. Will someone buy it? Is there a market for this? And it's like in beer, and yes, there is a market, right? There's a huge, huge market. That's a major tick, right? I think like you can't lose sight of the fact that the beer industry is massive. And so being able to work in an industry and be in an industry that is massive is a good place to start, right? I think like if you look at craft, obviously craft is on the on-trade, I think it's about 8%. In the off-trade, it's about 3.5% of the market. So it's not huge, but at the same time, you combine those percentages, 1.5 billion just for craft, right? Put that in perspective. Like the peanut butter market in the UK, have a guess. How big is the peanut butter market?
Oh, what a great question. The peanut butter market in the UK, 500 million.
56. Okay. Kombucha?
Oh, that'll be tiny, eh?
Bigger. It's bigger than peanut butter.
Is it?
Yeah. Not by much, but 75
million.
So
go.
like, I mean, just to
You
put
can
in
make it out.
perspective, right? Like it's a big market, right? Now there's a lot of people in it, but forget about the people that are in it for a second. The first thing is there a market? Yes, there's a market. Now you just have to be really good at in that market, right? I mean, like, okay, telecom's 130.6 billion, but it sucks, right? Who wants to work in telecom, right? So like, where are you going to find a market that's exciting, that's fun, that people are passionate about, that literally is like a community, you can connect with people, and it's huge, right? So yeah, let's start there, right? The second one is, and this one, again, data is data. And, but, there's a lot of talk about growth and, not growth within craft. But ultimately, if you take I looked at like global data as the source here, but in 2023, they released, so what they do is they use a 3-year volume CAGR, which is basically the trend over 3 years, for volume, not spend. So volume within craft, the 3-year trend as of last year was in growth for the first time since pre-COVID, right? So 2.3%. Value, so how much people spend, will be a little bit above that. So let's say it's 4 to 5% for value. So if I come to you and I say, look, I've got this market, forget, you don't know what it is. And I go, look, it's big. It's 1.5 billion and it's growing about 5% per year. What would you say?
Yeah, you'd be
Like,
pretty
yeah,
certain,
cool, right? Like as long as you're confident that you can nail what that market is, then yeah, like 100%, let's do it. Right. And I think that's the first, to keep it simple in this like optimism thing. I'm not trying to blow smoke up here. It's like, those are just like the straight facts. It's a big market. It's not, it's slightly growing at a market level, right? Obviously there's people within that market doing a lot better than others, and there's people doing worse. But at the end of the day, it's a big market with some growth, right? That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's excellent, really. What sort of, so, keeping on the theme of kind of reasons for optimism here, is like, what sort of broader trends do you see that can or are currently benefiting the craft beer industry now and potentially the next few years?
Well, I think the main one that comes to mind as you say that is premiumization. So one of the things that's going on is people are drinking less, but they're willing to spend more on what they drink. So you see that because, for instance, in beer and cider, overall volume is going down, but value is going up. So people are spending more, but they're drinking less. And obviously we know all the stats around moderation, non-alc and stuff play into that as well. But ultimately people are drinking less and they're treating themselves more when they do drink. That is the perfect trend for craft beer, right? Because the only thing is that you want that treat to be craft beer, not, I don't know, Estrella, because for some people, Estrella is the treat amongst that person, which is why I'm a hard time recalling the brands that would fit in there. And I live in Italy now. So like, for instance, Menabrea, which is like, an independent family brewery, a step above a Peroni, which is kind of like the Fosters of Italy, right? So yeah, like people are going to treat themselves more. So we want, that's great, right? That's a really, really good trend that will fuel craft beer for a very long time. Where it's going to hurt more is to the bigger breweries. Now, what the bigger breweries are going to do about that? They're going to try and premiumize the beers they have. They're going to raise price, but as they do that, the hope would be that the difference in price between a Budweiser and a Faith, for instance, becomes smaller and smaller, and therefore you're going to see more people making that leap. So that's a good trend. What other trends? I mean, one of the other trends within craft beer on the production side is like, because it has to, like, people are finding ways to become more efficient, and suppliers are realizing that they need to bring ways for people to become more efficient. So like the perfect example of this is CO2 recovery, which obviously you'll have a million more knowledge about than I will. But for instance, pre-war in Ukraine, like, good luck, right? Well, you're going to get I can't remember the name of the company there's two companies, one in Europe, one in the US, that were doing big systems. They're like 1 million pounds, that kind of thing. And then like out of nowhere, you have what are the Danish?
Dahlem.
What are they called?
Dahlem.
Thank you. And then there's one in India now as well that does quite a lot.
Yeah,
Hyper, yeah. So like, out of nowhere, you get these folks coming out that are building these systems that are like half the cost, maybe even less, right? Like, and so like the reality is there are solutions to problems that the industry has, but the reason why the solutions aren't necessarily ready yet is because they haven't been a problem before, right? And so a lot of the problems that have come up in the last couple of years, we're still solving some of those things, but those solutions will continue to come, right? And so being more efficient, whether that's ingredients, new like hop varieties or hop products is maybe a better way to say it. Whatever it might be, like, we use like hop cannons, things like that. If those can become more efficient in cost, for instance, you can use those. And like from my experience, like you can get like 20 to 30%. So you can either by putting the same amount of hops as you had before, you're going to get 20 to 30% more extraction, or you can reduce the hops with 20, 30% and keep your base, your taste profile equal to where it is now. Right. So those kinds of things like will either make your product better or be more efficient. So it's like all that kind of stuff is going to continue to happen within craft beer because it has to, right? Yeah. I don't know. There's probably a boatload more, man, but those are the two to come to mind.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to be done on efficiency. I see it, obviously, with what I do. I see it almost daily.
Yeah.
And there was definitely, I didn't go back to my career as well. I was definitely not working in the most efficient brewery at all. It was entirely about growth. It was about how much more volume can we make, however we can almost get there. And there was a lot of that going around. And I always say that I feel that right at the very start of the craft beer movement, when it got really like big, it was very much like us versus them. And our quality of our product is the most important thing at all of the costs. And we will never look to be more efficient because that's what the big brewers do. They cut corners, they make their beer in lower quality. That narrative got almost so dangerous that people were just being ludicrously inefficient.
Yeah.
And actually just like using too much to make something that doesn't affect the quality at all. And that's changed a lot over the last few years, mainly because of what you talked about with the huge shock in the energy markets, the CO2 market made all of this like, okay, now I need to actually look at this. And actually everyone's product quality got better, if not, stayed the same, if not got better. So there's been a big change in that. And I think efficiency is like a really, really important key word for the industry moving forward. I mean, obviously I always look at it from the production standpoint, but yeah, I see that as like one of the biggest trends that is going to be I saw a lot of it last year, of course, but I'm going to think we're going to see a lot more of it next year. I really like the idea, as you said, well, the notion that a lot of suppliers are helping brewers out with this as well.
Yeah. And I remember a couple of years ago, I was having this conversation with a couple of suppliers that I was working with, and it's like, and we were challenging them. We were like, look, you guys got to help us bring some solutions to this stuff, because like, if you do, you're going to have a huge market. But like, the one thing is, there's another trend that's maybe not so optimistic, which I hate to throw into the optimism part of the conversation, but like, one of the things is, if you look at what's happening overall in drinks, there's the categories of drinks are blending much more, more than ever before, right? So it used to be very much like alcohol, non-alcohol, sodas, and like nowadays it's like everything's kind of becoming one, which is good. That's like the way consumers think, right? So, but the issue with that is, if you look at the different types of drinks, if you look at like a soda, a water versus a beer, for instance, a beer is incredibly inefficient to make compared to those things, right? If you look at the process, I need X amount of weeks, I need to do this. Like, and I'm not saying like that in many respects is a good thing. That's where you can create the craft around it, right? The brand around it, the language, the storytelling, the content. There's so much stuff you can do with that. But at the same time, that's going to pose some issues in that reality. And there are going to be some people that are going to, craft breweries are going to be upset with, because they're going to take shortcuts to achieve a product that is because also their ingredients are getting better and better in terms of compounds they use and stuff like that. They're going to start creating products that are actually pretty good for consumers, and they can do them in a day. Right. And it's like, okay, now we've got like those inefficiencies really start showing themselves when those two categories are competing. Right now they don't compete, but when they start competing, all of a sudden that's, there's going to be a bit of an issue there. So yeah, there's I think, the reason I threw that in there is because ultimately it comes back to efficiency. And like, I'm a fan of craft beer, so I'm not a fan of taking shortcuts that hurt quality, but I think everyone has to be more than ever before. I think you should have people in the brewery and if you're a brewer, you should absolutely be more focused on this than ever before, is what kind of efficiencies are out there? What things can I trial that isn't just, like, I've got this new hop variety, I want to know if it's what kind of like flavor it's going to bring or aroma, whatever. What you also need to be thinking about is like, what actual, different products exist, what technologies might start existing, and actually really start thinking about how to make a product that is as good, if not better, or if you're saying it can be 5 to 10%, drop in quality because that's what the consumer, wants for the price point, whatever it might be, you make that decision. But you need to be more purposeful and conscious of the fact that you've got to be testing those things and seeing what's out there, right? Versus, I think before we never really focused on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So many great points in there, and yeah, the power of efficiency beyond just reducing resource consumption and looking at technologies and everything is such an important factor for next year as well. Well, this year now.
Yeah.
I have a question for you as well, Luca. I don't know where this observation necessarily came from for me, but I go back to when I was working in breweries in 2016, 2017. It was growth, 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 and everyone was talking about volume. But I feel like now everyone's probably talking about margin over volume. Do you think there is a power in creating a community around your brewery and within your brewery that, because that's really where the margin is won and lost, I think, from my observation, in community rather than chasing volume at lower margins? I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I think it depends. I think that my answer to that would be almost a step further back and just say, make a choice. Just make sure you make a choice, right? I think before what happened is people didn't necessarily make a choice. It's like I'm on my boat and I'm going in that direction and the wind is taking you and the tides are taking you. And then all of a sudden that stuff stops and it's like, oh shit, where am I going? Where, like that kind of thing. Like, and obviously I don't want to, I'm not discrediting. I mean, I was in those periods at the time. Like I'm not discrediting, obviously a lot of work and effort went into that, but at the end of the day, like it was hard to make a choice because you didn't know how big it was going to be. You didn't know, there's so much you didn't know. All the things what you did know is that more and more people were asking for it. Hard to keep up with demand. Go, 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 go. I think nowadays it's not the case. So I think people are making decisions about what they want their breweries to be. And so, because you have whatever it is, the number is now, 2,000 breweries in the country, give or take, a lot, the strong majority, 95% of them, their decision probably has to be, I want to be community-based, right? Because the country can't support probably more than 5% of breweries going for volume, right? It's just that the market isn't quite there yet. And that might change. So yeah, I think it is the case because margins are squeezed. Volume is more predictable, or let's say capped. Capped is the wrong word because it is still growing, but you know what I mean? And so where do you want to sit within that, right? So, I work with a lot of breweries. I have breweries that are like, I want to grow up until this amount. I want to get to here. Like those are conversations that we didn't really have in the past because it was like, our brewery can get to here. Our brewery size is here. But what would we do if we had to, like, it was always like, there's always more to consider, not necessarily that you're going to go there, but to consider. Whereas now people are talking much more in like, okay, I want to be like this. Okay, well, how do I make that most optimal, right? And yes, community comes down to it. We'd all, the best business model in the world is Treehouse Brewery, right? Sell over 1 million hectoliters at your front door and you'll be fine, right? But yeah, I think that observation you have is right because of sheer numbers. I don't necessarily think that's what everyone's doing. I think it's just 95% of people are having to do that because that's the reality, right?
Yeah, and I want to circle back to a point that we don't normally like to do, but when you're talking about premiumization and that bigger breweries are going to look to create those premium products to try have that premiumization, do you think, obviously we saw a lot of purchasing of breweries from big breweries 5 years ago or however long that stopped, really. Do you think that that's something they would look to do again, or do you think that's kind of part of the market is over?
I think it will happen again. I mean, obviously this is like crystal ball, right? I don't think anyone knows. I do think it will happen again. Not nearly to the same level because quite frankly, like there was mistakes made from everyone, from a lot of people buying, but it's not even a knock on them because it's hard to, there were some really bad mistakes, but I mean, but sometimes like when you don't know the size of things, when you don't know what it's going to be, you've got to make your best guess. And I think, in some cases people were pretty far off. But one of the things is, again, if you talk, like you said, the premiumization thing, if this stuff continues to happen, like for instance, is with Heineken and Beavertown, like is Beavertown going to be enough? I mean, I know they have Brixton as well. Will Brixton, like at some point, will they go, you know what? There's this style that's really creeping up, or there's this like, similarly for most of the other breweries, if you look across the board, like Carlsberg obviously is very much Brooklyn, but at some point, like, does that start to wane? Do they look for something else after they're done their brick Vic work? So there will be things. The other major reason is because a lot of the reason why things didn't go so well with the first round of purchases was because of the business cases assigned to them. So like, because again, if you didn't know the size of craft beer, what ended up happening is like, I want to buy your brewery. I believe so. Internally, they would do their business model and go, I believe that in 5 years I can make this brewery X, right? Mm-hmm. One of their assumptions in there is the growth of the category that didn't come to realization. I mean, like I can tell you, I know some of the business cases and like they were just absurd. But I think nowadays where valuations will be lower because people understand, more or less where the market is and where it's moving. If people are willing to accept lower valuations, which I think a lot, breweries will, then yeah, I think it will start happening again. But yeah, I don't think it'll be like boatloads. I think there might be another 5 to 7 out there within the next 3 to 4 years, kind of thing. And then after that, hard to say, really.
Do you think it would be important if this was the route that you wanted to take as a brewery, which some people do? Do you think it's important to like be bold and stand out for them to be something that people would purchase?
For sure. I mean, like ultimately, like I think that's one of the key things is that you'd be surprised. There's so many breweries out there. Like you've got to be on someone's radar, right? Someone's got to know about you, and obviously they do their research. But you'd be surprised, like they're not super knowledgeable in the craft beer world, not like you and I would be, for instance, right? So the folks that are typically doing a lot of the looking and the analysis and stuff like that. So yeah, you've got to stand out. But I think it probably is a combination of that. I think nowadays, which is different than it was before, is business model. So, like having EBITDA, they can obviously generate a lot more EBITDA because they'll get the ingredients at a lower price and stuff like that. But, having a business that is sustainable, that should, can with their efficiencies built in, can deliver, strong EBITDA. So it's not dilutive to their margin. That kind of stuff is going to be more important than ever before. As I said, it's it's probably going to be much more like, here's my portfolio of beer. So again, if you take the Heineken example and you've got Brixton and Beavertown as your craft options, like what fits, what fits alongside those brands, but equally, where has the market moved to that, consumers are demanding. So they want this kind of brewery. So there's a lot of different ways that I think they'll look at the business, but much different than before, which was probably more so, okay, like if you like take the Camden, I remember sitting in a meeting about Camden, and it was like premium lager, number one growth driver in the UK. Let's and boom, Camden Town Brewery. Like it was a pretty straightforward and to be honest, I think a fairly smart one from them. But yeah, I think nowadays is maybe a bit more complexity in terms of how people look at it.
Yeah, really interesting. Moving on to something slightly different. There's a lot to talk about sustainability, of course, something I talk about a lot. And, for the record, I always believe that sustainability isn't just the environment, it's people, planet, and profit. But we talked a lot, and I had George Wade on the show not so long ago talking about this, but do you think there's like a genuine demand in the market for sustainable products, so to speak?
I think you have to break it down. You have to break down the term market for a second, because if you think of beer, in most cases you have a buyer and you have a consumer. I would say if you ask a consumer, they're going to tell you yes. I think in reality, once you get to a shelf or a T-bar or whatever taps, the stuff that's going to convince them is how it looks and what price it is, pretty much, right? So I don't think at the point of purchase, it matters to people very much, although they will say it does. They might have favorite breweries in their head because one might be more, Dea puts the on the can, they put the carbon footprint, for instance, like that kind of stuff. They might lead them to create favorite breweries. But I think where the push is going to come more so in the short term is actually from the buyer side. So I think you have, and it's definitely been the case, you have like supermarkets as well as big pub groups that are going to be pushing suppliers more and more to be, sustainable suppliers will get, well, basically, if you want a tender, you have to be X, right? I don't want to say B Corp, but that's obviously one side of sustainable. But you know what I mean? Like there's going to be, that demand's going to come, I think, first from the buyer side of things, because yeah, they're one individual. It's easier to convince that one individual to get behind something like this, sustainability. They obviously, those businesses like a Mitchell's and Butlers or a Tesco will have pretty big CSR initiatives. So that's like a flow down. I think once you get to the consumer level, I think not quite yet, but I wouldn't, I do think it's almost like, in my head, it's going to go from like yes to no. It's not going to be like a gradual thing. It's almost going to be like, it's not going to be like, for instance, brand, like, or aesthetics, which for me, aesthetics is more like, it's like, yeah, I kind of like that. I like that. I don't like that. It's like, it's a bit of a spectrum. I think with sustainability, what's going to end up happening is it's like, are you in or are you out? Right? Are you a sustainable product or are you not? And some people are going to care and some people aren't. So I think you're better off being on the yes side of that. But right now, obviously from the buyer perspective, they're already putting that pressure. But I think overall as a business, you're better off being in that way, especially if that's the values you have as an individual, because it's coming.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really nice way of breaking it down, actually. And, almost the way I was looking at it visually in my head when you were saying it is like, to get onto the supermarket shelf, you have to have that sustainable product. But when it's on the shelf, it doesn't necessarily drive.
It doesn't unless they do it. So I think like a good example is you'll have like, you see like Brewgood, or like they'll be on like an end cap for some, it might be B Corp, it might be some other sustainability thing, but that, again, it's driven by the retailer. I think at that point, yeah, okay, if you make it that obvious, like, okay, these are sustainable businesses, local sustainable businesses, like, yeah, that might drive some stuff. But again, for me, it's all coming from the retailer push for now than it is from the consumer.
Yeah. It's really hard to get any sort of real data on if sustainable products matter to the consumer, but there's plenty of easy resources to find to back up the buyer. So yeah, really interesting.
One way to think of it is like, it probably helps with like brand love, brand sentiment, I think, but that's super hard to like translate into anything more than just that. I think it's very hard to translate it into rate of sale, but yeah, I think from a brand point of view, it can only be a positive, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If this is going to be a bit of a rogue question for you, Luca, and feel free not to answer it, but if you were to start a brewery, or had to start a brewery tomorrow or in the next week, month, year, what business model would you approach it with?
Oh man, like I do have an answer to this because obviously I've thought about this question a million times. So I would probably like, I think that, again, it comes down to opinions, right? This is just a combination of an idea that I have, but also where I think the market is. Like, I think where there's a lot to play for right now is kind of in the in-between space of craft and non-craft, right? So, and I think there's a few people that are going at it. Like, I think Jubal is obviously a good example. Brewgood, I think, are probably in that space as well. But yeah, it's hard to play in that space, quite frankly, because finding that balance between price and quality. But I think, for me, honestly, like I would just do something like really simple, right? Like, and I think the good thing about beer is, as you said, it's like there's communities. Communities play such a big role. It's so that you can really build around a community. So like I always remember there's a stat that, it's pretty old. I don't know if it's still the case, but when I was back in Canada working, like the number one promotion done in retail is when pizza and beer are combined. That's the highest selling promotion in retail in beer. So like at the end of the day, people that like beer, like pizza, people like beer, that kind of thing. So it's like, I would, whether it's exactly this or a variant of it, but I would almost start a brand that's like, like a pizza pale or pizza pills, a pizza, and like using like the aesthetics from like, the old school pizza boxes, that kind of thing, which, I mean, I know there's brands that have done releases like this, but I mean, I would do like a very simple core range, like a pizza one, like, so if you, it's, I guess to a degree, it's kind of like a Bundabus kind of thing where it's like, I'm creating it's like a culinary experience, but Bundabus is also very niche within their restaurants. This is like taking things that are widely liked and just saying, look, I'm going to make a product that's like it's like an elevated lager, it's an elevated this, but you're going to wrap it around something that makes people feel something, creates an occasion if you're going to have it, something like that, where I just feel like there's a lot of space to go at.
I mean, yeah, I'm going to go home and register the pizzapills.co.uk.
I'm watching how the idea. I'm not going to do it. So if anyone wants to do it, by all means. But I think like, I think one of the things I obviously I worked at Camden and spent a lot of time thinking about the premium lager side of things. The difficulty with premium lager is that people don't want to pay more for lager. Like it's like, it's one thing if you're talking about an IPA and a pale ale and all this kind of stuff, but like if you go, this is a lager, it's a premium version of a lager. Like people just can't wrap their head around it. Now, of course, in the on trade, it's slightly different than the off trade, but definitely in the off trade, that's the case. In the on trade, because you can build a bit more of an experience around it, you can convince people to spend a bit more, and also the price points are much more similar in the on trade between standard and premium. But yeah, like so like for instance, I remember sending a note to oh man, who was it? I can edit that part out, but yeah, I remember thinking like we've taken Jubal's, there's something about, I mean, obviously everyone have their opinion around the liquid. I don't drink it, but in terms of the brand, I think one of the things that makes a lot of sense is like, it's a premium lager, but the way you're telling people that it's premium, the way you're convincing people to spend more for it is that there's flavor, right? It's like, it's different. It's like, there's something more to this that means that you should pay more for this, right? So I think if you're going to do something in lager, you've got to give someone, it's not enough to just say, I'm Camden Town Brewery, I make a premium lager. It's great. You're going to love it. But it's like, it's still a premium lager. It's still a lager. It's like, that's a premium lager. So like, if you do like a pizza pills or something like, I don't know what other examples there are, but culinary things, like, again, what you're telling people is that this is tuned to this experience. So yeah, you want to pay a little bit more for that because you're going to have that full experience. Whereas if you just show up with a Budweiser, it's like, you're just going to be like everyone else kind of thing. So I think there's something in that, not to mention, if you want to go sell that around to pizzerias around the country, pretty good fit. So yeah.
I'd be so interested. So if I see the pizza pills come out next year, I'm going to laugh so much. This is great. Do you think there's any examples in the, I can say UK brewing scene, but it can be wider, of who are doing things really well at the moment and kind of maybe trendsetters in the industry?
I think that there are two categories. I think there are breweries that are newer, post 2020, that are a lot of examples of those that are thriving somewhat because they're smaller maybe and their duty rates are lower and they're more efficient and all that. But I think at the end of the day, like, they started at a time, like I think Vault City is a great example of it because, doing the kinds of beers they do and the whole idea around that Stupid series, right? If you would have done that in like 2018, 2017, like, we probably would have been, there would have been a lot of people pissed off. There's still people pissed off about that kind of stuff. But like, I think everyone nowadays realizes that, everyone's got to go have a shot at doing what they want to do at the end of the day. Right. Like, and so I think people are more concerned about their own well-being than someone trying to do something that they don't agree with. Right. I think back then it was different. So I think, you take someone like that and they're just, they're able to kind of just like, this is what we're going to do. This is, we're going to go after it. Really passionate about it. Amazing people. I know you've done some work with them as well, but like from everyone I've worked with there, it's just, they're all great people that really believe in that and what that brand is trying to do. And I think like, that's an example. You have so many, of like Flock, another one that I know those guys a little bit. That I know Beak was started before, but kind of came into their own I think they actually started like right after a couple of weeks after COVID hit their real brewery. I think they started slightly before that. But so, you have all these breweries that I think, really kind of set into here. This is what we're going to be at a time where they could build that business without these kind of fluctuations that were changing the strategy. Like the one I mentioned, like Northern Monk for us, it just wiped our strategy within a couple of weeks. We had to change everything. And then I think you have the second category. The second category are breweries that are that have, what's the best way to say it? That like really strong seasoned breweries. So those that have like, they have a destination and they've selected a path that they're going to go down, and like but they're really good at it. Right. So these are like, you take Verdance, for instance, like at the end of the day, like, really high quality stuff for those kinds of beers. There's not many people that match them on that. And I think, as long as you make the decisions that continue to support what makes you the best and what makes you unique, then you're going to have continued success. Deya is another example, right? So you're going to have, you have these breweries that kind of sit in that camp of, Deya built an incredibly strong brand, obviously good beers, obviously specifically Steady Rolling Man is an amazing brand. Like, so I think like you have these ones that ultimately, we talked about like the market, the beer market being there's a big market and a lot of people in it, but I think it doesn't matter how many people are in the market. What's important is how good are you at delivering what people want in that market. And I think you have these examples of people that are just like super good at what they do. And you're always, no matter how many breweries come into that market, as long as you're really, really good, the best at delivering something that matters to the consumer within that market, you're always going to be successful, depending on how you define success, of course. But you're always going to have some niche that you've carved out. Hopefully that niche is big enough to sustain your business and your goals. So yeah, I think it's two things. There's a lot, but you've got these newer breweries, everything from like more traditional craft beer styles like a Beak or a Flock to a Jubal and a Vault, and then you've got and Brewgooder, and then you've got like the old guard that just killer at what they do.
Yeah, all excellent examples, actually. Yeah, so many things that have been done so differently, especially at Vault City. I mean, I work with, as you said, I work with them, and I know internally just how passionate and driven they are to produce, beers that are very different to what a lot of the craft beers are doing, but the way that they make them is so fascinating and so purposeful, which something I found quite inspiring almost when I was there, just how purposeful they are about what they do,
Sure.
which I think is really like powerful when you're in a production team anyway. I'd love to spend some time here, Luca, talking about just some of the statements that we see online all the time surrounding the doom and gloom as we really look to sort of dispel them and try get people to feel what should be optimism about a really exciting market that has been exciting for a long time, and I still think will be exciting for a good amount of time. So I'm going to throw statements at you, and if you don't mind, you can sort of dispel them for
Hopefully.
me. So the first one I'd like you to dispel is that craft beer is saturated.
You sure you want to get me started on that? How much time is this thing?
Yeah, we got unlimited. You go.
No, I mean, like, it's like saying, like, imagine you're like an actor or an athlete, right? That's like saying, I'm not going to go try out for that play because there's too many people trying out, right? Like, it's like that's one way to look at it, right? But it's like, it goes back to what we were just saying about like a Verdance and a Deya and stuff. Like, if you're gonna go do something and you're gonna be the best at it, like, doesn't matter how many people are doing it, you're the best, right? You're gonna stand out. So that's not necessarily refuting the idea that the market is saturated, but it's saying even if it is, like, who cares, right? What does that mean? Like, it just means there's a lot of people doing it. It doesn't mean that there's people succeeding at doing it. It doesn't mean that there is an opportunity. It just means there's a lot of people, right? That's one way to look at it. I think another way to looking at it is that most categories are what we would call saturated, right? I think, like, at the end of the day, if something is popular, more people are going to do it. As more people do it, it's going to become more saturated. It's like, so saturated, people talk about it almost like it's like a threshold. It's like, boom, we're saturated. Fuck, we're done, right? Like, it's like, that's not the way this works. It's like, saturated is like it's a moment in time, right? So things evolve quite a lot. So So, okay, yes. Is there probably more breweries for the amount of volume that exists within craft? Is there more breweries than there should be for the amount of volume that exists for craft breweries today? Yes, there probably is, right? But, the number of breweries, I think in 2024 versus 2023 is the first time it went down. So, naturally, life cycle, the things will adjust. So there's that. Another thing is you have the bigger breweries, like I think I mentioned at the beginning, the percentages of like craft beer being around 8 or 3.5%, depending on the channel of total beer and cider. Like if you better way to look at that is, 95% of the market is the big guys, right? So like, what are we doing to challenge the incumbents, right? And I think this is something that we haven't done nearly enough of in craft beers. Like really, instead of just playing to the craft beer consumer and instead of infighting between craft breweries for the volume that exists, what are we doing to really challenge those? And that's the examples we talked about earlier about like Jubal and, sitting in that the idea I give of the, whatever the premium lagers, the pizza pills, that kind of stuff is like, are we actually doing stuff that's really kind of challenging those brands, and all that volume that's there? And another really good example of that is Left-Handed Giant, which again is another one I would place in the who's doing things well. What they're really good at is beer experiences, right? They have amazing spots. Like most people don't know how many spots they own because they don't call them all Left-Handed Giant, but they're incredibly good at hospitality. So, and they went into Bristol, and they get this like place in the smack dab in the middle of it, overlooking the water. Amazing place, the kind of place that any like global brand would be like absolutely salivating for. And these guys did. I know it wasn't an easy piece of work to do, but that's a way to really take stuff from incumbents, because everyone that walks around Bristol sees that it does a lot for the brand. It's massive. It's like, that kind of stuff. So like, we've got to start being bolder. Bolder is a term I started using more and more in talking to people. Like, we're just not bold enough in beer, right? Beer is not craft beer is not a bold category. There's very few people being bold. So I think, if we do that, then saturated becomes all of a sudden, if you take 1% from the incumbents, that's huge. That's like, what is that? That's another, if we're at, that's another 400 million, right? So let's start knocking those. All of a sudden, the perspective changes quite a lot, right? So yeah, I mean, like, and then even in craft beer, yes, the number of breweries are going down, but even as you said earlier, a lot of the breweries are becoming much more niche, saying like, I want to just be this, I want to be small, like a Mills, or like you've got people that are before that never really happened. Like Colonel was like an outlier, and nowadays you have that. So yes, there's breweries are going down slowly, but actually even in the breweries that do exist, people are being more purposeful about not trying to grow too much, right? So or staying within their what they believe is the right level for them. So all these things are going to shift opportunity within. So saturation is a load of crap, because it depends on all these things happening. And then you have the bigger craft breweries, right? So the bigger craft breweries are interesting because what's going to happen with them? Most of them aren't hugely profitable, right? Like sustaining them as they are today isn't probably the end game, right? So what is it, okay, become more efficient? If you do that, will they make some decisions to pull out of certain contracts, and that opens up volume? Or will some of those be the ones that sell, like we talked about earlier? And then what happens is that, does that open up more room for craft beer? Or does that actually close things because a global brewer buys it and distributes everywhere like Beavertown? So these things are so dynamic that trying to come out and saying we're screwed, it's saturated, is just like, it's just so useless. Like I don't understand. I think what people are really trying to say when they say that is that it's a mature market. Okay, it is a mature market, but like that doesn't mean anything. Like that you can still be the best in a mature market and kill it. You can still disrupt a mature market. That's what craft beer did in the first place. Let's not forget, beer was mature before craft happened, right? So anyway, I could go on forever.
So good, so passionate as well. I love it. Okay, I got another one for you, Luca. Is the on-trade dying?
Well, dying implies that it's like gone, right? So yeah, like I think
Hmm.
it's evolving for sure. I guess similar to craft beer, it's evolving, right? I think one of the things with the on trade is, and actually the report that we are beer folks did the Horizons report, which was a couple of months ago now. There's a good section on this, because like I think if you think about the pub and what it started as, like a meeting place and community hub and that kind of stuff, and to where it's become now, like it's very different. It's lost that that the initial purpose of it is become very different. And I think nowadays what you have is obviously people drinking less, people being, let's say, more cautious with spend and things like that. So I think you got to go back to, again, the consumer and what's their purpose to go out, right? And I think that original idea of what the pub was is missing in today's on premise, like that community hub. That's one thing. And I think you have other examples, like within cities specifically, much more destination stuff. So I'm going to go to a place like, the Devonshire obviously gets all the news with like the Guinness experience at the Devonshire, and it's so busy. Or like Mission Mars is a good example of like big destination places. I think what's happening is like there are these like branches of the on-trade that are going to be very successful. The neighborhood pubs, as opposed to city center pubs. These like pieces that are going to have success. What's dying is that traditional pub mentality, that it's there because it's there. You have Joe who's gone there for 30 years and is going to continue to go there. Like that's going to, that doesn't have a future, I don't think, right now. So I think like you've got to play into that. And I think that's the thing about craft beer is like, again, the Left-Handed Giant tap room, a good example. Another one in Bristol is Wiper and True, right? If you've been to that tap room, it's like I think the folks that are investing in tap rooms that are really like community hubs are going to be uber successful, because it's like the pub of now. It's like what that pub was 100, 150 years ago, 200 years ago. That's what it is now. Like, Track is another good example. There's so many events around the space they have. It's such an open, welcoming space. You've got these like incredible places that have have all these like community events. You can see a brewery, the beer from the local breweries being poured. Like it's unmatched, but you've got to again, be bold. You can't just, I love what Flock did, to be fair, because I was going to send Ross a note this week, because they sent the email this week of the new tap room, right? And of course they have an industrial state, like many do, but they really invested in like the bars, like the wooden, I don't know if you've seen it, but like wooden panel, like they've really invested to make it more than just an industrial state. Here, come have a beer at our tap room, right? I know not everyone can do that, but I think that's an ambition everyone should have, because those are the pubs of today and of the future, right? And then I think if you're going to do other things, like you got to think bolder. Like okay, maybe you do like neighborhood pubs. Another good example is if you take Graceland, so like the folks that have Earl of Essex, as well as many pubs in London, many craft beer pubs. They opened one recently that I cannot remember the name of off the top of my head, which is pretty bad, but I was there not that long ago. But it's like it's the first one where they opened up a little bit more in a neighborhood up North London. And again, it's like it just sits really well, and as a neighborhood pub, all the locals go there, that kind of thing. So I think people just have to be more purposeful about why they're doing the on-trade versus, I'm just going to put something here, or there's something that already exists here, I'm just going to like reopen it. So yeah. And I think you're already seeing that. I mentioned a bunch of examples. Verdant obviously has started to go into a lot more to the pub side of things. And I saw recently they're redoing the Seaview, so they're investing to make that, a bit of a unique place, a hub, that kind of thing. So see more and more of that. The other thing, within pubs themselves, the other thing that's a reason for optimism is craft beer is actually now the third best average sales for pubs as of last year. So like number one is world beer. So things like Cruz Campo and Madri and all that kind of stuff. That's 52,000 on average for a pub. The second place is standard lager. That's 42,000, and craft beer as of this year will be the number three at 27,000. So craft beer within pubs is actually 65% of the average sales value of standard lager. That's like pretty incredible, right? To think that we've come all that way. And so, and you would expect that would hopefully continue to go up for some of the reasons we talked about earlier. So yeah, okay. Are the number of pubs going to go down? Probably they will. Not probably, they will. but the ones that are there are going to be better at what they're doing, and they're going to be much more focused on who the consumer is. And the consumers of today demand more than just lager. So they're going to, they're going to be buying, hopefully be more craft beer in those establishments. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's more of an evolution than it is like a doomsday thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Great answer as well. I feel like everyone is after that experience in pubs now. Whatever that experience is, it can be different, but a lot of the pubs that I've seen that have closed have been ones that probably didn't quite have that experience part nailed. And yeah, as you said earlier, it's like people are going in to pubs now. They are more likely to spend on less pints, but more likely to spend on a premium product, which is also a really important part of or growth category in a pub. I think it was really fascinating. You said that I didn't know that it was the third best selling volume for a pub was craft
That's from
beer.
your old friends,
Really
Heineken. I got their report from last year. So
oh, really?
yeah, it's basically right now. Craft is basically tied with cask ale, but it's obviously growing.
Well, yeah, man, that was absolutely fascinating. What do you think you would like? How would you summarize the key takeaways from this episode?
Oh man, I don't even remember what I said 5 minutes ago. No, I guess summarize is like is you wake up every day with a choice of how you want to look at things, and obviously there's a lot of content out there that will try and convince you of X, Y, or Z, right? But I think at the end of the day, we have to remember within beer that we're very lucky to be in beer as a category, and obviously the definition of beer changes all the time. But in beer in general, as a category, it's got size. It's people that want it. There's a lot of positive evolutions that are happening, as we talked about with premiumization, with some of the efficiency stuff that's going on. A lot of resilience built over the last few years, which has been a challenge. And, and not necessarily is it easy today, but I think that resilience will pay off, as well as the fact that nothing is easy. If you're in business, it's not easy. Jobs aren't easy, right? So being not easy is perfectly fine. So I think that's all about perspective and frame of reference and how you want to think about things. There's people thriving out there. There's a lot of people thriving. I work with a lot of people that are thriving, to be honest. I think that's really important for people to keep in mind. Equally, there's people that aren't thriving, that are suffering. But there's reasons why. I see it. I see some of these business. I understand what's driving some of them, and where some are why they're having issues. But I think if you plan things correctly and you have that optimism and you crack on, like there's no reason why you can't be successful. So I think that's like the summary. I mean, that doesn't cover off everything we talked about, but I think that's like the main message that should be at the end of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd also love anyone who has listened to this episode and subscribes to the fact that this isn't doom and gloom, is the next time you hear people talking about the doom and gloom is that you challenge them. I know we don't all want to be that brewer, but it is really important that we actively change the narrative around, because it is getting a bit exhausting sometimes hearing about all of the negativity that surrounds it, when actually I feel that it is a very positive industry. And as you said, like, we're fortunate, but we also actively chose to work in beer. And the reason is because it is really fun. It's a great product. And we have a really nice community of people who are very collaborative and super friendly. And it's easy to go for a pint with a fellow brewer who lives down the road. Like, that is something that's like really easy for us, because we're all very like-minded people. And I feel like we should really utilize that. And it's one of our biggest strengths is collaboration. And I think we should just make sure that we continue to stick with that and stay positive. So if you can't convince them, then just get them to listen to this episode.
I think like one of the things too, like the one thing I would throw in is because I did have a bit of a back and forth one time with a journalist, and it's like anything, you're never always right, you're never always wrong. I guess he did say something to me which is good. At the end of the day, like a journalist, they've got a lot of things going on. They're oftentimes going to take the easy wins as maybe a bit of what they wouldn't say, that's the term I would use, but like they're going to get what's in front of them. This piece of news comes through. Okay, I'm going to repackage that, and so I think one of the things is it's actually on us to bring more good news, because they're not investigative journalists. These people aren't going to try and do what I do and what you do, right? Like they that's not their job to a degree, right? Their job is to report what's going on, and what's going on is what they see. It's not what's actually going on. So I think it's on us to actually provide more. And I think the brewing community is awful about talking about themselves. I get it. I'm the same way, but like we don't shout about our successes. The non-alcohol community is incredibly good at it. Like if you see like the narrative around non-alcohol, it's because like every little positive statistic is like slapped everywhere. The breweries don't do that. So I think there's a lot more that can be done about the breweries actually just shouting about their successes and putting it in front of people so that journalists have that content to pick up on, the stories to tell. There's probably a whole, another idea of something like creating content around like top positivity or like positive stories within the brewing world. There's probably something in that should be done. I don't know. Maybe there's all those like podcasts and content for the craft beer community that I think is evolving quite a lot these days. It might be good for one of them to start like focusing a little bit more on that side of things as well, because I just think we missed that opportunity. And it's content that not only will feed into journalism, but I think generally people overall like talking about, what's going on in beer and making it positive versus not. Like this kind of episode, I think when you came with this idea, I was like, man, that's great.
Yeah, what a really lovely point to make. Actually, maybe it is on us to actually generate more positive news. Yeah, I'd never even considered that really, but it's a really good point. And yeah, we actively share and talk about the negativity when actually, there's so many, as you said, so many positive things happening with so many good breweries. We need to be much better at shouting about that. That's a really, really, really cool point. Luca, I always do this at the end of my pods now. I ask for the guests' top 3. So I've got a question for you. What do you think the top 3 lessons that the craft beer industry can learn from other sectors?
Good question. I guess we just said one. Let's be more positive. Yeah. I might throw that one in there, but there's a few other that come to mind. So I think one of the things which is like the way content is consumed today it's evolved a lot. I think if you look at the businesses that are like really impressing me these days are people that are really focused on content. So there's a Canadian company called Midday Squares that I've kind of shouted about a few times. I suggest anyone to go take a look at them. But like one of the founders is a guy named Jake Carls, and he like, when they get like a listing in a new place, he like goes to the store and like with the staff does like a choreographed dance. And like instead of it's like, here, I've listed this in Tesco with a picture, it's like these folks are creating content. And to be honest, it's almost like instead of like paying an influencer to promote their product, they actually just have become influencers because they create killer content. And again, going back to what we were saying about breweries not being great about talking about themselves positively, brewers in general are very closed unless you kind of go to the tap room and stuff like that. And I think, was very good in the initial wave of Instagram in terms of photography and driving content, like image-based content that makes the product look great. But nowadays people want transparency. They want people, they want stories. It's like the whole idea of like reality TV, like all the documentaries you see on Netflix and stuff. It's like, people want more of that. And I don't think we evolved in the brewing space. I think like being able to create content, if a brewery came out there and like started making killer content, I think it would just do wonders for them, because one of the biggest issues within craft breweries is reach, right? Like I remember I've said this a few times, in some podcasts that I've done, but like if you look at like, take an example of like one of the larger breweries that you would use. So like, I don't know, like a Tiny Rebel or a Vocation or Northern Monk or something like that. If you measured their prompted awareness, so awareness is like, does someone know who you are? Prompted awareness is literally, I say to you, have you heard of Tiny Rebel? Do you know Tiny Rebel? If you say, including their name, if you say that, it's 90% of people are going to say no. 90% of people. So like the biggest, if you do Guinness, it's like 90% of people say yes, right? So the biggest problem for smaller breweries is reach, both in terms of distribution, but also share a space in people's mind. So content is a way to get over that in a very inexpensive way if you do it right. Trying to do billboards and ads and stuff like that, very expensive. Most craft brewers can't do it. So it's almost like a shortcut to reach. I think that's like a massive thing. And like, even guys like folks like Cristiano Ronaldo, who's this football player, he's invested hugely in this now because that is the future. It's like content is the future. And I just don't think we've moved on. So that's one. Number one. Point number two is know your consumer, know your customer, your target customer, and what they seek, both consciously and subconsciously, right? So think, gone. If you take like a company like Apple, Apple's not really a product, right? Of course, they have all kinds of products, but if you think of what they do, what they build, it's not really a product. It's like a solution. It's a feeling that just clicks with a type of consumer, right? And so, but if you look at beer, I think it's like, here's my product, who wants it, right? Like I'm going to make this, who wants it, right? Or the craft beer community will like this because it's, thick and got this and that. I think another good example is Pollen Projects, which was started by Ben Branson, the founder of Seedlip. So it's an incubator for non-alcoholic drinks. And it's like what he's so brilliant at, I worked with him last year on a project, what he's so brilliant at is doesn't really think about a product. He thinks about the consumer and what's going on in the world. And he's like, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. He's kind of credited with building the non-alc movement because built Seedlip at a time when no one was drinking non-alcoholic stuff, but he kind of figured like this makes sense because this is going on, this is going on. So I think if you understand consumers and you start with the consumer and you start to solve for the consumer, what you start doing is you start building products that people want and not necessarily joining in and putting products out there that we know people already want. And that's really important because if you talk about a mature market, the way you break maturity is by almost fragmenting off new pieces, right? So I think that's another key thing that needs to happen. Think like Apple, you can evolve. Like obviously there's things like hop water. There's, that's one example, but there's plenty of different, like there's a cider craft brewery here close to me in Italy, which I just had a can from them the other day and it was brilliant. It's like, I found out that he used to work at craft breweries in the UK and he came over here and he did this. I know there's some examples going on in the UK of that, but like, these different branches, that kind of stuff, as long as it's sizable, can make quite a big difference within the craft beer community and the market and the size of it and this idea of saturation and maturity. The third one I would say is to be inclusive, not exclusive. So the reason I say that is because I know beer, we generally always talk about how it's like inclusive community and collaborations and stuff like that. But I think one thing, I had this chat last year about the term craft beer and it not being correct anymore and people being duped and all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, like craft beer as a term for the category is an excellent term. I think it's an amazing term because it's premium. It's like makes people think it's like craft, even though obviously it's not by hand. It's such a good term that elevates and makes people think, okay, I should spend more of that. That's craft beer. That's not standard lager or that kind of thing. You look at like non-alcoholic, it's called non-alcoholic. It's described by what's not in it. That's a terrible name. We have craft beer. It should be like this great thing. We should celebrate that kind of thing. But it kind of became very much so like who's in that club and who isn't, right? Like, well, you're not craft beer. You are and it was, for me, it was like a little bit of, a little bit too much of like, that's not right. And that is, and going back to what we talked about earlier with some of the new breweries that are doing things that are, would have been like ridiculed 5-6 years ago. I think being open-minded, and what I'm really saying is being open-minded. It doesn't matter who's saying they're craft and who's not. Look at what they're doing and look at like, are consumers responding to it? Because that's really what matters. It doesn't really matter like if you think they're craft, if they're invited to a festival or not, but look around and like, if what they're doing is clicking, ask yourself, hey, is that something I should look at? And if it doesn't feel right for your values, don't do it by all means, but don't like have a closed mind to what's going on, have a very open mind to what's going on and then decide what's right for you. And don't worry about what's going on around you. I think that that mentality is really, really important. It's quite different than it would have been, 7 years ago. I think it's evolved quite a lot already, but there's probably this discussion around the term craft beer last year got me a little bit like, feels like we're taking a step backwards, but anyway.
That's awesome. What an incredible top three. There's gonna be so much value for people listening to that, looking at breweries. And yeah, I was really fascinated by the independent indie beer versus craft beer movement. It's good to get your take on it. I wasn't really sure how it sat with me, but I can absolutely.
To be honest, I'm kind of like halfway through writing something on it. I feel like I missed the boat at this point, but I think there's positives and there's negatives. I think there's examples of people that have like if you look at Attic Brew, like those guys have been brewing. I'm like, I think they've executed it really well. It fits really well with their brand. I think it can work for some people. I don't think it's going to make a huge difference, but I think it can work for some people to sway a few decisions. I think, all I was saying is I just feel like that whole discussion was about solving a problem for the brewers as opposed to solving a problem for the consumers. And I think anytime you solve, like it's kind of useless because it's all about the consumer. It's not really about the brewers. Yeah. I know there was like the consumers being duped and there were some statistics, but again, going back to statistics, I looked back on it and I was like, I don't know. I feel like the statistics were maybe just self-professing versus really trying to solve a problem for the consumer. The consumer doesn't really care. What they want is the right product, right? So yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you can probably make a statistic to back up just about anything you want to say if you really dig in deep enough. So they're not always the best, are they? But yeah, look, Luca, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I really, really appreciate it. If anyone has anything they want to talk to you about, is there any way they can get hold of you in a reasonable
100%,
way?
yeah. Like best two ways would be, I mean, if you go on LinkedIn, I tend to just try and stay pretty active and put content out on LinkedIn. So Luca Lorenzoni, I don't know if you can share anything, Chris, before you do, but that would be one. You can obviously message me there. If not, yeah, send me an email. Right now, I still use my personal email. I'm getting my business one set up, but it's luca120512@gmail.com. So, I mean, send me an email. I'm always up for chatting if I have the time or, if anyone wants to hear more hear more about Path and potentially look at, working together and stuff, by all means too.
Awesome. Two great ways. And I'll link both of those
Perfect.
in the show notes so people have nice, easy access to them. But yeah, look, Luca, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. It's been an
Me too, man.
pleasure.
Really good. And always good to talk to you. Hopefully next time in person.
Yeah, man. Absolutely.
Cheers.
All right. Take care, mate. Well, what a way to start the year. What an insightful guy Luca is. It's not very often that you get someone of his caliber with his experience in both big breweries, the biggest in the world, and also right here in the UK, the craft brewing scene. So really, really found that insight. And I mean, for those who listen regularly know that I am a bit of a nerd for economics and business and marketing anyway. So content like that for me is so good. Selfishly, I really hope that you as the brewer listener also got some really interesting insight into macro trends into the brewing industry. And ultimately, as we really talked about and really nailed home, just actually how positive it really is. There are, of course, a lot of people going through hard times, and I don't want this to be anything known to undermine any of that. Breweries have shut and big names have closed, but that is a natural part of any market that has ever existed in the history of mankind. So we just got to remember that actively this is a positive place to be. And as Luca said right at the end, we should really make an active effort to be more positive and share more positive news, not just amongst ourselves, but to the wider press as well. Next episode, I'm going to have Gareth Moore from Daya, which is extremely exciting for me because he's going to talk exclusively about NPD, new product development, and how they seem to get it so consistently right. Super excited for that episode. If you enjoyed this one, please make sure you share it around, both on social media or just send the link to a friend, a brewing colleague, or a supplier, anyone who you think might find this information interesting. It really helps me grow the reach of the show. And ultimately, I really want this content to help the brewing industry. So on that note, thank you so much. And I'll catch you on the next episode of the Modern Brewer Podcast.